She called her gutter trash in front of the entire board of directors. She laughed at her 3-year-old dress while sipping vintage champagne that cost more than a car. Jessica, the mistress, thought she had won. She had the man, the promotion, and the spotlight. She thought Sarah was just a poor, helpless housewife who would run away crying. But Jessica made one fatal mistake. She didn't look at the guest list. Because the woman walking through the ballroom doors wasn't just a guest. She was the owner of the entire hotel chain. She was a billionaire heiress. And she was looking right at Sarah, with tears in her eyes. Get comfortable. You are not going to believe how this ends. The chandeliers inside the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan were blinding. They cast a kaleidoscope of light over the crowd, men in bespoke Italian suits and women dripping in diamonds that could pay off the national debt of a small country. Sarah Jenkins adjusted the strap of her navy blue dress. It was a modest piece bought off the rack at Macy's 3 years ago. She had tried to accessorize it with a simple pearl necklace, faux pearls. But standing next to the glittering elite of New York's shipping industry, she felt like a gray moth in a swarm of butterflies. "Stop fidgeting," Mark hissed, leaning close to her ear. His voice, once the source of her comfort, was now cold, sharp steel. "You're embarrassing me." Sarah looked up at her husband. Mark Jenkins was handsome, undeniably so. His jaw was square, his eyes a piercing blue, and he wore success like a second skin. He had just been named the regional director of Vanguard Logistics, a promotion Sarah had worked 2 jobs to support him through while he finished his MBA. "I'm sorry, Mark," Sarah whispered, looking down at her scuffed heels. "I just feel out of place. You know I don't like these events." "That's because you don't belong here, Sarah," Mark said, taking a sip of his whiskey, his eyes scanning the room looking for someone else. "Look at you. You look like you're going to a PTA meeting, not the gala of the year. I told you to buy something new." "With what money, Mark?" Sarah asked gently. "You moved all our savings into that investment account I can't access. We're behind on the mortgage." Mark rolled his eyes. "God, you're so small-minded. It's called liquidity, Sarah. You wouldn't understand finance. Just stand there and don't talk to anyone important. I have to go greet the CEO." He didn't wait for a response. He walked away, leaving his wife of 6 years standing alone near a pillar, clutching her purse like a shield. Sarah felt the sting of tears but blinked them back. She was used to this. The late nights, the locked phone, the smell of perfume that wasn't hers on his collar. She knew their marriage was crumbling, but she stayed. She stayed because she remembered the man he used to be before the money, before the ambition poisoned him. And perhaps foolishly, she stayed because she had nowhere else to go. Or so Mark thought. Across the room, the crowd parted. A woman laughed. It was a sound like breaking glass, sharp, clear, and drawing every eye. It was Jessica Vance. If Sarah was a moth, Jessica was a bird of prey. She was wearing a scarlet Versace gown that clung to her body like liquid fire. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, and on her wrist sat a diamond tennis bracelet that sparkled violently under the lights. Jessica was Mark's assistant, but everyone in the company knew she was much more. Sarah watched paralyzed as Mark approached Jessica. He didn't look at her the way he looked at Sarah. He looked at her with hunger, with adoration. Jessica whispered something in Mark's ear, and he laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh that Sarah hadn't heard in years. Then Jessica turned. Her eyes locked onto Sarah across the ballroom. There was no shame in Jessica's gaze, only predation. She tapped Mark on the shoulder and pointed at Sarah. Mark hesitated for a second, his face flushing with annoyance, but Jessica grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the corner where Sarah was hiding. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to run, she wanted to vanish, but her feet were lead. "Well, well," Jessica cooed as they arrived. Up close, her perfume was suffocating roses and musk. "I didn't think you'd actually bring her, Mark. I thought we agreed this was a night for professionals." Mark refused to look Sarah in the eye. He stared at his drink. "She insisted on coming, Jessica. You know how she is." "I insisted." Sarah's voice trembled. "Mark, it's our anniversary. You said we would celebrate here." Jessica threw her head back and laughed. It was a cruel theatrical sound. Oh, honey, Anniversary Mark brought you here because he needed a designated driver. Isn't that right, baby? She placed a manicured hand on Mark's chest. Mark didn't push it away. Go get the car, Sarah, Mark muttered. I'm going to stay for the after party with Jessica and the partners. No, Sarah said. The word hung in the air. It was soft, but it was firm. Mark looked up shocked. What did you say? I said no. Sarah repeated, her hands shaking. I am your wife. I have supported you for 6 years. I paid your tuition. I paid the rent when you were an intern. You are not going to dismiss me like a servant in front of your mistress. The music seemed to stop. People nearby turned. The confrontation had begun. Jessica's smile vanished. Her face twisted into a mask of pure malice. She took a step closer to Sarah, towering over her in 6-inch stilettos. Who do you think you're talking to? Jessica hissed. You think because you have a ring you matter? Look at you. Jessica reached out and flicked the strap of Sarah's dress. Polyester, Jessica sneered. From the clearance rack. You reek of poverty, Sarah. You smell like desperation and cheap laundry detergent. You don't fit in Mark's world anymore. Look around. These people are the elite, and you're just the baggage he's been too polite to drop at the curb. Jessica, stop, Mark said weakly, looking around to see who was watching. Not here. No, Mark, Jessica snapped. She needs to know her place. She thinks she's the victim. She's an anchor dragging you down. Jessica turned back to Sarah, raising her voice so the nearby tables could hear. Let's be real, Sarah. Mark is a rising star. He's going to be a VP by next year. He needs a woman who can host galas, who can speak French, who understands the market. Not a woman who counts coupons and thinks Olive Garden is fine dining. The crowd was gathering now. Whispers rippled through the room. Is that Mark Jenkins' wife? The mistress is tearing her apart. God, look at that dress. She really doesn't belong here. Sarah felt the heat rising in her cheeks. Shame burned her skin. Money isn't everything, Jessica. Decency matters. Loyalty matters. Loyalty doesn't buy a penthouse, Jessica spat. And it certainly doesn't keep a man interested. Jessica grabbed a glass of red wine from a passing waiter's tray. She swirled it in the glass, her eyes gleaming. You want to talk about loyalty? Mark bought me this bracelet with his bonus check. The bonus check he told you he didn't get. Sarah looked at Mark. He went pale. Is that true? Sarah asked, her voice breaking. We couldn't pay the heating bill last month. You said the company froze bonuses. Mark looked away. I deserved a reward, Sarah. I worked hard. You let me freeze, Sarah whispered. You let me sleep in a cold house so you could buy her diamonds. Because she's worth it. Mark shouted, finally snapping. Look at her, Sarah. She's magnificent. And look at you. You're plain. You're boring. You're poor. I'm tired of being the only one bringing value to this relationship. I'm tired of carrying you. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark had said the quiet part out loud. He had publicly disowned his wife for her lack of wealth he had denied her. Jessica smirked. She had won. She raised the wine glass. Oops, she said deadpan. She tilted her wrist. The dark red Cabernet splashed all over Sarah's chest. It soaked into the navy fabric, staining the faux pearls dripping down her skirt. Oh, look, Jessica laughed. Now you finally have something expensive on you. That wine is a 2015 vintage. Don't worry, I'm sure you can get the stain out with whatever poor people use. Baking soda. Laughter. Actual laughter from the crowd. Some of the socialites covered their mouths, but others, the cruel ones, chuckled along with Jessica. They saw a wounded animal, and they sided with the predator. Sarah stood there, red wine dripping onto the marble floor. She felt hollowed out, destroyed. She looked at Mark, waiting for him to defend her, to hand her a napkin, to do anything. Mark just took a step back as if the wine stain were contagious. "You should go, Sarah," Mark said coldly. "You're making a scene." Sarah closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. She prepared to turn around and walk out of the hotel, out of the marriage, out of this life. But then the heavy oak doors at the main entrance of the ballroom swung open with a thunderous boom. The room fell silent instantly. The laughter died in Jessica's throat. The general manager of the Pierre Hotel rushed in looking frantic. He was followed by 4 massive bodyguards in black suits wearing earpieces, and behind them walked a woman. She was tall, elegant, wearing a white power suit that looked sharp enough to cut glass. She didn't wear jewelry. She didn't need to. Her presence alone sucked the air out of the room. It was Evelyn Sterling. Everyone knew the name. The Sterling family owned half of the real estate in Manhattan. They owned shipping lines, tech firms, and coincidentally the parent company of Vanguard Logistics, Mark's employer. Mark's jaw dropped. That's Evelyn Sterling, the chairwoman." "What is she doing here?" Jessica whispered, suddenly looking nervous. "She never comes to the regional galas." Evelyn didn't look at the stage. She didn't look at the buffet. She walked with military precision into the center of the room. Her eyes scanned the crowd, bypassing the CEOs and the VPs. Her eyes landed on the woman covered in red wine. Evelyn stopped. Her face went pale. "Sarah," Evelyn called out, her voice echoing in the silent hall. Mark looked confused. He looked at Sarah, then at the billionaire. "She knows my wife." Sarah opened her eyes. She wiped a drop of wine from her chin. She stood up a little straighter. "Hello, Evie," Sarah said softly. The room gasped. Evie? No one called the Iron Lady of Wall Street Evie. Evelyn Sterling ran. She broke protocol, ignored her bodyguards, and ran across the ballroom floor. She stopped right in front of Sarah, ignoring the wine stain, and pulled the poor housewife into a bone-crushing hug. "Oh my God," Evelyn said, pulling back and holding Sarah's face in her hands. "I found you. We've been looking for you for 5 years. Grandmother is sick, Sarah. She's asking for you." Evelyn turned her head, her eyes suddenly locking onto the wine stain on Sarah's dress. She saw the tears in Sarah's eyes. She felt the trembling in Sarah's hands. The billionaire's expression shifted from joy to absolute terrifying ice. She slowly turned to face the crowd. She looked at Mark. She looked at Jessica. "Who did this?" Evelyn asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried more threat than a loaded gun. "Who did this to my cousin?" The word cousin hung in the air like a guillotine blade that had just dropped, severing the reality everyone thought they knew from the truth that was now standing before them. For 10 agonizing seconds, no one moved. The orchestra in the corner had stopped playing mid-note. The waiters holding trays of hors d'oeuvres stood like statues. The only sound in the cavernous grand ballroom was the hum of the industrial air conditioning and the ragged breathing of Mark Jenkins. Mark stared at Evelyn Sterling. He looked at her immaculate white suit, the way she held herself with the casual arrogance of someone who owned the building, the city, perhaps the world. Then his eyes jerked to Sarah. Sarah, his wife. The woman who clipped coupons for laundry detergent. The woman who panicked when the car needed a $200 repair. The woman he had just watched get humiliated for being gutter trash. "Cousin," Mark whispered. The word felt foreign in his mouth, like he was trying to speak a language he didn't know. A nervous, frantic smile twitched at the corner of his lips. He took a step forward, his hands raising in a placating gesture. "Ms. Sterling!" Mark chuckled, though the sound was dry and brittle. I think there's been a misunderstanding. A funny one, actually. This is Sarah, my wife, Sarah Jenkins." He emphasized the last name as if it were a brand of ownership. "She's from a small town in Ohio." Mark continued, his voice gaining a little more false confidence as he looked around the room, trying to get the crowd to share in his incredulity. "Her father was a mechanic. She worked as a barista when we met. I think you have her confused with someone else." Evelyn Sterling didn't look at Mark. She didn't even blink. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a silk handkerchief monogrammed with gold thread. Gently, with infinite tenderness, she began to dab the red wine from Sarah's cheek. "Tell him, Sarah," Evelyn said softly, her eyes focused solely on her cousin's tear-stained face. Sarah sniffled, her hands trembling as she clutched her ruined dress. She looked up at Mark. For the first time that night, her eyes weren't filled with sadness. They were filled with pity. "Mark," Sarah said, her voice hoarse, "my father was a mechanic. You're right. He loved engines. He spent every weekend in his garage." "See," Mark said, exhaling a breath of relief, turning to Jessica with a smug nod. "I told you. Mistaken identity." "He was a mechanic," Sarah continued, her voice hardening slightly. "But he was also the founder of Sterling Motors. He built the engine that won Le Mans 3 times. He didn't work in a garage because he had to, Mark. He worked there because he loved it. And when he died, he left everything to me." The silence returned heavier this time, denser. Jessica Vance, who had been standing with her arms crossed, suddenly uncrossed them. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. She looked at the cheap pearls around Sarah's neck. She looked at the old dress. "That's a lie," Jessica spat out, but her voice lacked its usual venom. It was thin, screechy. "If you're a Sterling, why do you dress like that? Why do you live in that tiny apartment in Queens? Why do you let Mark pay for everything?" Evelyn finally turned to face them. The look on her face was terrifyingly calm. It was the face of a woman who decided the fate of companies before breakfast. "Because she wanted to know," Evelyn said. Her voice was low, smooth, and dangerous. When Sarah turned 21, she inherited the majority share of the Sterling Trust. It's a burden, you see. Every man she met saw the dollar signs. Every friend wanted a loan. She was lonely. She wanted to find someone who loved Sarah the person. Not Sarah the ATM. Evelyn took a step toward Mark. Mark instinctively took a step back, bumping into a waiter and sending a glass crashing to the floor. The sound was explosive, but no one looked at the broken glass. "So," Evelyn continued, stalking him like a panther. "She created a test. She moved to a modest apartment. She took a modest job. She cut herself off from the family accounts for 5 years. She wanted to see if she could find a man who would stick by her through the hard times. A man who would love her even if she couldn't buy him a Porsche." Evelyn stopped inches from Mark's face. She could smell the expensive whiskey on his breath. She could see the sweat beading on his forehead. "And she found you, Mark," Evelyn whispered. "She chose you. She paid your tuition with money she earned waiting tables, even though she could have bought the university. She cooked your meals. She cleaned your clothes. She loved you." Evelyn's eyes drifted to Jessica, then back to Mark. "And you," Evelyn asked, "how did you repay that loyalty? You found a woman who liked your bonus check. You found a woman who insulted my cousin for being poor while she was wearing a dress worth more than your entire life insurance policy." Mark's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. His brain was short-circuiting. The liquidity, the investment accounts, the struggle. It had all been a test he had failed so spectacularly that he had practically set the classroom on fire. "Sarah," Mark stammered, reaching out for her hand. "Honey, baby, why didn't you tell me? I would have treated you like a queen if I knew." Sarah recoiled from his touch as if he were burning hot. "That's the point, Mark," Sarah said, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "You shouldn't have needed the money to treat me like a queen. You should have done it because I was your wife." The tension in the room shifted from shock to judgment. The crowd, previously entertained by Jessica's cruelty, now sensed a shift in the wind. They were predators too, and they knew when the alpha had arrived. Mark and Jessica were no longer the popular couple. They were the prey. Jessica, realizing her position was collapsing, tried to pivot. She was a survivor, a climber. She thought she could charm her way out of anything. "Ms. Sterling," Jessica said, flashing a bright fake smile and smoothing her red dress. "Look, obviously emotions are high. We didn't know. It was just a bit of banter. You know how office parties are. I'm sure Sarah understands. We were just teasing. Teasing. Evelyn repeated the word, tasting it. Evelyn signaled to one of her bodyguards. The massive man stepped forward and handed Evelyn a tablet. She tapped the screen twice and turned it around so Jessica could see. It was a live feed of the security cameras in the ballroom. But not just the video. It had audio. Evelyn played the clip from 3 minutes ago. You reek of poverty, Sarah. You smell like desperation and cheap laundry detergent. You're just the baggage he's been too polite to drop at the curb. Jessica's voice echoed from the tablet speakers, tinny and cruel. Every insult was magnified. The laughter of the crowd in the recording sounded demonic. Evelyn paused the video on the frame where Jessica poured the wine on Sarah. Is that banter, Ms. Vance? Evelyn asked. Is pouring a 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon on a woman's chest a form of corporate humor I am unaware of? Jessica swallowed hard. I slipped. No, Evelyn said. You didn't slip. You poured. I saw the wrist action. It was deliberate. It was malicious. And do you know why you did it? Evelyn walked around Jessica, circling her. Jessica stood frozen, clutching her empty wine glass. You did it because you are insecure. Evelyn dissected her. You looked at Sarah, and even in her 3-year-old dress you saw something you don't have. You saw dignity. You saw a woman who didn't need to hang off a man's arm to feel valuable. And that terrified you. So you tried to make her look small to make yourself feel big. Evelyn stopped in front of Jessica and looked at the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. The one Mark had bought with the stolen bonus. Nice bracelet, Evelyn noted dryly. Mark bought that for you. Yes, Jessica said defiantly, lifting her chin. He loves me. He buys me things because he appreciates me. Evelyn looked at Mark. Mark, where did you get the money for that bracelet? The bracelet costs roughly $12,000. Mark looked at the floor. It was my performance bonus. Your performance bonus? Evelyn nodded. The one you told Sarah was frozen by the company. Mark didn't answer. Evelyn turned to the crowd, raising her voice so the board of directors could hear. For the record, Evelyn announced, Vanguard Logistics did not freeze bonuses this year. In fact, we had a record quarter. But interestingly enough, Mark, your bonus wasn't $12,000. Mark looked up, panic in his eyes. Ms. Sterling, please. Your bonus was $5,000, Evelyn said coldly. So where did the other $7,000 come from? She swiped on the tablet again. A bank statement appeared on the screen. Oh, here it is, Evelyn read. A withdrawal from the joint savings account, house repair fund, date yesterday. A collective gasp went through the room. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. The roof money, she whispered. Mark, you took the money for the roof. The roof that leaks every time it rains. You took that money to buy her a bracelet. It was a low blow. It was gritty, ugly domestic reality clashing with the high society glamour. It stripped away the facade of the successful executive Mark was trying to project. He wasn't a high roller. He was a thief. A husband who stole from his leaky roof fund to impress a mistress. Jessica looked down at the bracelet. Suddenly it didn't look like a trophy. It looked like a stolen shingle. It looked cheap. I didn't know, Jessica stammered, pulling her hand back. He told me he was rich. He told me he had investments. He lied to you too, Jessica, Evelyn said almost pityingly. He's not rich. He's leveraged. He's drowning in debt trying to keep up appearances. The only thing keeping him afloat was Sarah's frugality. Evelyn turned back to Mark. You called my cousin poor, Evelyn said. But you are the one who is spiritually and financially bankrupt, Mark. You stood there and watched your mistress humiliate the woman who has been subsidizing your ego for 6 years. You are not a man. You are a parasite. Mark's face was purple. He looked at his boss, the CEO, Mr. Henderson, who was standing nearby. Mr. Henderson, Mark pleaded, This is a personal matter. It shouldn't affect my position at the company. I'm the regional director. My numbers are good. Mr. Henderson, a gray-haired man who had been watching the scene with a scowl, stepped forward. He looked at Evelyn Sterling, the woman who owned the parent company that owned his company. Then he looked at Mark. Mark, Mr. Henderson said, his voice flat. You are representing Vanguard Logistics at this gala. Your behavior tonight, the theft of family funds, the public humiliation of your wife, the lack of integrity it reflects on us. Mr. Henderson paused, glancing at Evelyn for approval. Evelyn gave a barely perceptible nod. Furthermore, Mr. Henderson continued, Ms. Sterling just informed me via text message 5 minutes ago that she is reviewing the leadership structure of the Northeast region. Mark's knees buckled. What? But we aren't going to fire you, Mark. Evelyn interrupted, a cruel smile playing on her lips. Mark looked up, hope sparking in his eyes. You aren't. No, Evelyn said. Firing you would be too easy. It would let you leave this room and start over somewhere else. And I don't want you to start over. I want you to finish what you started. She signaled to the bodyguards again. One of them stepped forward with a new set of clothes. It wasn't a tuxedo, it was a gray jumpsuit. The uniform of the hotel maintenance staff. I own this hotel, Mark, Evelyn said. And I just remembered. We have a spill in the ballroom. Red wine. Very difficult to clean. She pointed to the spot on the floor where the wine had dripped from Sarah's dress. If you want to keep your job at Vanguard, if you want to keep your health insurance, if you want any hope of a reference in this industry ever again, Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper. You will get on your knees, and you will clean up the mess you made. The room went deathly silent. Mark looked at the jumpsuit. He looked at the crowd. He looked at Jessica, who was backing away from him. He looked at Sarah. Sarah didn't look away. She just watched, waiting to see if he had any dignity left. Mark hesitated. His pride was screaming, but his fear of poverty, fear of being blacklisted by the Sterling Empire was louder. Slowly, painfully, Mark Jenkins dropped to his knees on the marble floor. He took the napkin Evelyn threw at him, and he began to scrub. The sound of Mark scrubbing was the only thing that existed in the ballroom. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was a rhythmic, pathetic noise, the sound of a 6-figure salary dissolving into a wine-stained carpet. Jessica Vance took a step backward. Her heel caught on the edge of the carpet and she stumbled slightly. She righted herself, her eyes darting toward the exit signs. The grand double doors were only 50 feet away. If she could just make it there, she could call an Uber. She could disappear. She could delete her social media. She could pretend this night never happened. She took another step, quieter this time. Going somewhere, Jessica. The voice wasn't Evelyn's. It was Sarah's. Sarah hadn't moved from her spot. She was still clutching her purse. Her dress still ruined, but her posture had changed. The slump was gone. Her shoulders were back. She looked at Jessica, not with the fear of a wife losing her husband, but with the curiosity of a scientist observing a bug under a microscope. Jessica froze. She forced a laugh, but it came out like a cough. I need to use the ladies' room. I'm feeling a bit faint. I bet you are, Sarah said calmly. She walked slowly toward Jessica. The crowd, sensing the shift, parted like the Red Sea. They wanted to see this confrontation. They wanted blood. Sarah stopped 2 feet from Jessica. Up close, the contrast was stark. Jessica was polished, painted, and adorned in borrowed luxury. Sarah was messy, stained, and radiant with authentic power. You called me gutter trash, Sarah said softly. You said I reeked of poverty. It was heat of the moment. Jessica pleaded, her eyes wide. Sarah, you know how men are. Mark told me. He told me you were terrible. He said you were lazy. He said you drained him. I was just defending the man I love. Love? Sarah tilted her head. You don't love him, Jessica. You loved the regional director title. You loved the idea of the bonus check. You loved winning. Sarah reached out and gently touched the diamond tennis bracelet on Jessica's wrist. Jessica flinched as if Sarah's fingers were branding irons. "This bracelet," Sarah murmured. "It's beautiful, but it's heavy, isn't it?" "What do you mean?" Jessica whispered. "It was bought with stolen money." Sarah explained, her voice sounding like a teacher explaining a simple math problem to a child. "Mark took that money from our joint account. Technically, half of that money is mine. Which means," Sarah's fingers tightened around the clasp of the bracelet, "half of this bracelet is mine." Jessica gasped, pulling her arm back. "You can't take it. It was a gift." Evelyn stepped forward, then her white suit gleaming under the chandelier lights. "Actually, under New York state law, gifts purchased with marital assets, misappropriated without spousal consent, are subject to clawback during divorce proceedings. Or..." Evelyn paused, checking her nails. "We could call the police and file a report for grand larceny. Since the amount exceeds $3,000, it's a felony. Mark goes to jail. And since you are in possession of stolen goods..." Evelyn let the sentence hang in the air. Jessica looked at Mark, who was still on his knees, sweating through his dress shirt, scrubbing the floor. He offered her no protection. He couldn't even protect himself. With shaking hands, Jessica undid the clasp of the bracelet. It fell from her wrist and landed with a dull clink into Sarah's open palm. "Smart choice," Evelyn noted. But Sarah wasn't done. She slipped the bracelet into her pocket, not because she wanted it, but because she wouldn't let Jessica keep it. "You know what the saddest part is, Jessica?" Sarah asked, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Jessica and the nearby circle could hear. "You humiliated me to climb the social ladder. You wanted to be part of this world, the world of the elite." Sarah gestured to the room, the billionaires, the shipping magnates, the heirs. "But look around you," Sarah said. Jessica looked. She saw hundreds of faces, but none of them were looking at her with desire or envy anymore. The men were looking at her with disgust. The women were looking at her with cold amusement. "In this world," Sarah said, "we don't hate people for being poor. My grandmother grew up on a farm. We hate people who are cruel. We hate people who lack grace." "You didn't just insult me, Jessica. You showed everyone here exactly who you are. You are socially radioactive." Jessica felt the walls closing in. She realized Sarah was right. No one in this room would ever hire her. No one would date her. No one would invite her to a gala. She had played the game of high society, and she had lost everything on a single hand. "Please," Jessica whimpered, tears finally cutting tracks through her perfect foundation. "I just want to go." "Then go," Sarah said, stepping aside. "Walk out that door, take your Uber, go back to your apartment, and pray that tomorrow when you walk into the office your keycard still works." Jessica didn't wait. She gathered her skirts and ran. She didn't walk, she ran. Her heels clacked frantically against the marble, a chaotic rhythm of retreat. The heavy doors slammed shut behind her, swallowing her into the night. Sarah didn't watch her go. She turned her attention back to the man on the floor. Mark had stopped scrubbing. The stain was mostly gone, replaced by a damp, dark patch on the carpet. But he didn't stand up. He stayed on his knees, staring at the wet spot, his breathing ragged. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, creeping horror. He had heard everything. He had heard Jessica abandon him. He had heard Sarah dismantle her. And now he felt the heavy gaze of his wife, his billionaire wife, burning into the back of his neck. "Stand up, Mark," Sarah said. Her voice was tired. Mark slowly pushed himself up. His knees cracked. His pants were wet at the knees, stained with the mixture of wine and cleaner. He wiped his hands on his jacket, ruining the silk. He turned to face Sarah. He tried to summon the old Mark, the charming, confident manipulator. He tried to find the smile that had worked on her for 6 years. "Sarah," he began, his voice trembling. "Look, I know I messed up. I messed up big time. I got caught up in the stress of the job. Jessica, She manipulated me. She preyed on me. Stop, Sarah said. She didn't shout. She just held up a hand. Don't blame her. You're a grown man, Mark. You made your choices. Mark licked his lips. Okay, I take responsibility. I do. But Sarah, we're married. We made vows. For better or for worse, right? This is the worst part. But we can fix this. Now that I know about your family, about us, I can be the man you need. We can be a power couple. Imagine it, Sarah. You and me. With your resources and my drive. Evelyn burst out laughing. It was a sharp, barking laugh. His drive? Did you hear that, Mr. Henderson? He thinks he has drive. Sarah didn't laugh. She looked at Mark with profound sadness. Mark, Sarah said, do you know why I stopped paying the bills 3 months ago? Mark blinked. Because you were struggling. You said your hours were cut. No. Sarah shook her head. I stopped paying them because I wanted to see if you could handle the reality of our life without my invisible safety net. For 6 years, Mark, I have been paying off your credit cards every month without telling you. I've been topping up your bank account whenever it got low. I paid for your car insurance. I paid for your MBA loans. Mark's face went slack. You paid my loans? I paid everything, Sarah said. You thought you were a successful man living a good life, but you were a child living on an allowance. And the moment I stopped the allowance, the moment I let you stand on your own 2 feet, you crumbled. You stole money from our roof fund. You cheated. You turned cruel. Sarah reached into her purse. She didn't pull out a checkbook. She pulled out a thick folded document. What is that? Mark asked, eyeing the paper. These aren't divorce papers, Sarah said, anticipating his question. Not yet. This is a financial disclosure of our current assets and liabilities. She handed it to him. Mark opened it. His eyes scanned the lines. His face turned gray. This says I'm in debt. Massive debt. You are, Sarah nodded. Since I stopped paying your bills, you've maxed out 4 credit cards. You took a predatory loan to buy that suit you're wearing, and you owe the IRS back taxes that I usually handle. But you have money, Mark shouted, desperation creeping in. You're a sterling. You have billions. You can wipe this out with a pen stroke. I can, Sarah agreed. But I won't. Mark stared at her. What? I won't pay a cent of it, Mark, Sarah said, her voice hardening into steel. Because of the prenuptial agreement. We didn't sign a prenup, Mark cried out. I remember I told you it was unromantic and you agreed. I agreed not to sign the one you downloaded from the internet, Sarah corrected him. But do you remember the stack of papers my uncle, the family lawyer, asked you to sign before the wedding? The ones you didn't read because you were too busy watching the football game. Mark's memory flashed back. A dusty office, a stack of documents. He had just signed them, blindly wanting to get it over with so he could go to the bar. You signed a relentless separation of assets agreement, Evelyn interjected, stepping up beside Sarah. Everything Sarah brought into the marriage, her inheritance, her trusts, her properties, remains hers. And everything you brought into the marriage, your debt, your bad decisions, your ego, remains yours. Mark dropped the papers. They scattered on the floor around his wet shoes. So, Sarah said, looking at him for the last time, you are walking out of here with exactly what you deserve. You have your debt. You have your mistress who just abandoned you, and you have a wet pair of pants. Sarah reached for her left hand. She grabbed the simple silver band on her ring finger, the ring Mark had bought her at a pawn shop, because he said he didn't believe in expensive jewelry. She pulled it off. You can have this back too, Sarah said. She dropped the ring. It didn't make a clink. It made a tiny, insignificant thud on the carpet. It turned your finger green anyway, Sarah whispered. She turned around. I'm ready to go, Evie. Evelyn smiled, looping her arm through Sarah's. Let's go. Grandmother has the jet waiting at Teterboro. "We're going to Paris for breakfast." They began to walk away, leaving Mark standing alone in the center of the ballroom. The crowd watched him. No one spoke to him. No one offered him a drink. He was a ghost, a bankrupt, broken ghost. But just as Sarah reached the door, she stopped. She turned back one last time. Mark looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Was she coming back? Was she going to forgive him? "Oh, and Mark," Sarah called out across the room. "Yes?" Mark asked, breathless. "Don't worry about the roof," she said. "I'm selling the house. You have 30 days to vacate. I'd start packing tonight." The doors clicked shut, sealing Sarah and Evelyn into the cool night air of Manhattan, and sealing Mark inside the suffocating reality of the ballroom. For a moment, Mark didn't move. He stared at the closed doors as if by sheer willpower he could reverse time back before the wine spill, before Jessica's insults, back to when he was the master of his small deluded universe. "Mr. Jenkins." Mark turned. It was the hotel manager. He was holding a clipboard. "The gala is concluding," the manager said, his voice devoid of the respect it held an hour ago. "Since Miss Sterling and her party have departed, and since the Vanguard Logistics corporate card has been declined, we need to settle the incidental charges." "Incidental charges?" Mark blinked, dazed. "The vintage Cabernet Ms. Vance spilled," the manager listed, tapping his pen. "The cleaning fee for the carpet, and of course the damage deposit for the suite you booked upstairs. We found it. Quite messy." Mark patted his pockets. He felt his wallet. It felt thin. He pulled out his credit card, the one Sarah used to pay off. "Try this," Mark whispered. The manager took it. He walked to a portable terminal. "Beep." "Declined," the manager said loudly. "Insufficient funds." Mark felt the room spin. The wealthy guests were filing out, stepping around him like he was a traffic cone. He saw Mr. Henderson, his boss, walking past with his wife. "Mr. Henderson," Mark called out. "Sir, I can explain. Can you cover the tab? I'll pay you back on Monday." Mr. Henderson stopped. He looked at Mark with a mixture of pity and revulsion. "There won't be a Monday, Mark," Henderson said quietly. "HR will courier your personal effects to your home address. Do not come to the building. Your security clearance has already been revoked." Henderson walked away. Mark was left standing in the center of the Pierre Hotel ballroom, surrounded by the debris of his life. He was alone. Truly terrifyingly alone. And for the first time in 6 years, there was no Sarah to pick up the tab. 1 year later. The autumn wind whipped through the streets of Chicago. It was a cold, gray afternoon. Outside the convention center, a line of limousines stretched down the block. It was the opening day of the Global Innovation Summit, the most prestigious business event of the year. A man in a slightly ill-fitting green parka stood by the curb, shivering. He held a plastic sign that read, "Valet Parking, $40. It was Mark. He looked older. His hair was thinning, and the stress of the last year had carved deep lines around his mouth. The bankruptcy proceedings had been brutal. The divorce had been swift. He had lost the house, the car, and his reputation. No one in the logistics industry would touch him. He was now working 3 part-time jobs just to afford a studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. "Hey, buddy," a driver yelled, honking his horn. "Move it! You're blocking the entrance." Sorry, Mark muttered, shuffling out of the way. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the red carpet. The crowd of paparazzi surged forward, cameras flashing like lightning. Mark watched from the sidelines, blowing on his hands to keep them warm. He wondered who it was. Probably some tech billionaire or a movie star. The driver opened the rear door. A woman stepped out. Mark stopped breathing. It was Sarah. But it wasn't the Sarah he knew. This wasn't the woman in the clearance rack dress. This woman was radiant. She wore a tailored emerald green coat that matched her eyes, and she carried herself with a grace that commanded silence. She wasn't just a guest. She was the keynote speaker. Mark took an involuntary step forward. "Sarah," he whispered. As if she heard him over the roar of the cameras, she turned. Her eyes scanned the crowd. For a split second, her gaze landed on the man in the green parka holding the valet sign. Mark's heart hammered. He prepared himself for her anger. He prepared for her to point and laugh. He prepared for her to come over and scream at him for what he had done. But Sarah did none of those things. She simply looked at him. Her expression was perfectly neutral. There was no hate. There was no love. There was just nothing. He was a stranger to her, a background character in the movie of her life. She turned back to the cameras, smiled a genuine, dazzling smile, and walked up the red carpet, disappearing into the warmth and light of the summit. "Hey, valet!" a voice barked behind Mark. Mark jumped, turning around. A woman in a cheap, flashy red dress was standing there, chewing gum. She looked tired, her makeup a little too heavy, her roots showing. It was Jessica. She was holding the keys to a beat-up sedan. She didn't look at Mark's face. She just saw the uniform. "Here!" Jessica snapped, tossing the keys at him. "Park it close, and don't scratch it. It's a rental. I'm here to try and meet a producer." Mark caught the keys. He looked at Jessica. She looked at him. Recognition dawned in her eyes. Her jaw dropped. "Mark," she gasped. Mark looked at the woman who had ruined his marriage, the woman he had destroyed his life for. She looked miserable, desperate, just like him. "It's $40, ma'am," Mark said, his voice hollow. "Cash only." Jessica stared at him for a long moment. Then she let out a bitter, cynical laugh. She dug into her purse, pulled out 2 crumpled $20 bills, and shoved them into his chest. "Keep the change," she sneered. "Looks like you need it more than I do." She walked away, heading toward the entrance where she would inevitably be turned away by security. Mark stood there clutching the $40. The wind howled. Snow began to fall. He looked up at the massive banner hanging over the convention center. It featured a photo of Sarah smiling with the caption, "Sarah Sterling Philanthropist of the Year." Mark looked at the photo. Then he looked at the crumpled bills in his hand. He put the money in his pocket, got into Jessica's cheap rental car, and drove it toward the back lot. He had finally learned his place. And that, my friends, is the tragic but satisfying end of Mark and Jessica. In the end, Mark got exactly what he valued most: money. But it was only $40 handed to him in pity by the woman who helped destroy him. This story isn't just about a billionaire heiress in disguise. It's about value. Mark thought value was about price tags, brand names, and job titles. He was so obsessed with the appearance of wealth that he threw away the only thing of real value in his life: a loyal, loving partner who supported him when he had nothing. Sarah didn't need to prove her worth to anyone. She knew who she was. And when she finally walked away, she didn't just take her money, she took her dignity. Mark and Jessica were left with the hollowness they created. They learned the hard way that when you marry for money, you pay for it every single day for the rest of your life. Wow, that was a heavy one. I want to know what you think. Do you think Sarah should have forgiven Mark? Or did he get exactly what he deserved in that parking lot? If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. I've got another incredible drama coming up for you in the next video. It involves a cheating husband, a hidden camera, and a wedding speech that goes horribly wrong. You do not want to miss it. Leave a comment below with the word karma if you made it to the end. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.